Chronically online, someone who is basically always on the internet and their entire existence revolves around being on the internet. People who are chronically online typically have no friends in real life and stay online, starting useless debates that literally achieve nothing outside of the screen. Fun fact, most things are not actually that offensive. However, if you spend any amount of time on the internet, you would have no idea. This is because anyone who spends more time on the internet than in the real world tends to get stuck in an echo chamber. The most ridiculous example of this, in my opinion, is when someone said, "You can't use 'say her name' when a white person gets shot because that's a phrase only used for black people." Never mind the fact that the person who got shot was trans, and frequently would have her non-real name used. Of course not, that doesn't matter. Now, before I get on with this video, I do have to make a confession. I am a recovering, chronically online person, and I feel like many of you are too. So strap in for whatever the hell this video is going to be. Coronavirus! Coronavirus! Like most people during the Great Plague of 2020, I was cooped up inside with nothing but the internet to distract myself. If you take a look at social media, you will see that this is around the time I started becoming the most active. I didn't realize it at the time because I was seeing mostly information that I agreed with. As I'm sure most of you are aware, this is because of an echo chamber that exists online tends to create. In this context, an echo chamber means an environment in which a person encounters only beliefs or opinions that coincide with their own, so that their own existing views are reinforced and alternative ideas are not considered. There's a few reasons this is the case, most of the reasons being how social media companies are owned by power-hungry corporations that are only driven by making a profit. But we'll touch on that later. What I will focus on now, however, is how exactly an echo chamber can be dangerous. When you spend most of your time interacting with people in the real world, you are forced to be exposed to ideas that you don't agree with. This forces your brain to process information you don't agree with, whether you realize it or not. This is what is referred to as subliminal processing. When you spend most of your time on the internet, you can simply block those you disagree with. This creates an environment where you are only talking with people you agree with. When your feelings are validated, which often happens in this scenario, your brain releases a chemical called oxytocin, the same chemical that is released when you are having sex. This chemical is one of the strongest brain chemicals, primarily because having sex is sort of important when it comes to the survival of one species. So yes, positive attention does feel as good as sex. This is why echo chambers are so dangerous. You can quite literally get addicted to having people agree with you. Now, before you ask why this doesn't happen in real life, remember when I talked about subliminal processing? However, it is important to recognize that rich people can have this happen in real life because when you have enough money, you can pay to have yourself surrounded by yes men. Recently, there are two video games that have come out to massive controversy, Hogwarts Legacy and Atomic Heart. Hogwarts Legacy, due to the original creator of the books, who had no game involvement by the way, and Atomic Heart because the devs were Russian. Hey, hi, America! You are aware that you already look incredibly xenophobic to the rest of the world, right? This is not helping your case. Damning an entire country due to the poor actions of one individual doesn't help with this reputation. Now, if these games are bad, you would expect the numbers to follow suit. But they don't. On the day of its release, Hogwarts Legacy topped the charts on Steam. I was trying to find out exactly how many copies it sold or how much money it made, but unfortunately I couldn't find anything. Because no articles wanted to talk about that. No, of course they wouldn't. That's not nearly as interesting about how controversial the game is. Anyways, it's not a surprise it did well. I've played the game almost 100 hours now, and it's a really good game. For those of you who play video games, you are aware of just how bad the gaming industry has been recently. So seeing a game that was released, finished, and that worked with a likable cast of characters was a bit refreshing. I'm looking at you, Cyberpunk 2077. No offense, I also love that game. But why do you sound like that?
Evelyn, what's she to you?
Just once, I want a modern character that doesn't sound like they smoke an entire carton of cigarettes every day. I myself have been publicly chastised for playing the game, which is rather ironic considering the fact that the person who chastised me did absolutely nothing when an anti-trans bill was released in my home state of Utah. Our only natural source of water will be gone in 5 years, and the governor is doing nothing about it except for banning trans children. And you are mad at me for playing a video game. People are dying, Kim. Also, if your argument is anything supporting J.K. Rowling is bad, then you're going to have to be prepared to not support a lot of companies, including, but not limited to, Warner Brothers, Universal Studios, Cartoon Network, Comcast, CNN, Cinemax, Adult Swim, AT&T, HBO, Sony, and probably many others. Because most of these companies are either subsidiaries or own each other. And because Warner Brothers currently owns the rights to Harry Potter, it means that anyone related to them is currently marketing off of that success. And even if you say, well, I do support some of those companies, but they're not actively releasing anything Harry Potter related, and even if they are, I'm not supporting it. If you have an HBO subscription, I'm so sorry to tell you, but you are supporting Harry Potter. Last I checked, the entire Harry Potter movie franchise is on HBO Max. And because HBO, as far as I'm aware, isn't owned by Warner Brothers, they have to pay royalties in order to have those movies on their site. Those royalties are paid using the money that you use for the subscription. So just having HBO is supporting J.K. Rowling.
Lol, just kidding guys, now HBO is transphobic.
Also, and I know a lot more people are going to be mad at me for this, but the way that they did representation in the Hogwarts Legacy video game was actually pretty good. I mean, there is an Asian professor, and she has nothing to do with actual academics. Like, she teaches broom flying, which is a sport. Any character who's not white, there's not really a reason given. They're just a character who happens to be black, who happens to be blind, who happens to be Asian, who happens to be Korean, who happens to be Chinese, who happens... You get the point. The only character where their race somewhat pertains to the story is Natty, but that's because she's literally African. So, like, yeah, obviously she's black and she talks about it because she's a transfer student from Africa. That's a pretty normal experience that anyone's going to have coming from another country, and it's done in a very well put together way. Also, if you're criticizing the creators for having a trans character with such a low voice, she was voiced by an actual trans woman, so now you are transphobic. I've been liberal for a long time, okay? I know how to play this game. Don't try me, bitches. Additionally, when it comes to the controversy surrounding Atomic Heart, the only reason people are mad is because Putin decided to attack Ukraine a little over a year ago. This game has been in development for over 5. Also, people are mad that the developers aren't publicly denouncing Russia and their actions. Yes, some of these developers no longer live in Russia, but a lot of them still have family members who do. Which means that if they were to speak out about Russia, their family members would be killed. And there's a good chance they could be tracked down and killed as well. In Mother Russia, you do not criticize the government criticizes you. Because I know some of you are as dense as a piece of osmium, I feel the need to go into more depth. Do I stand with trans people? Yes. Do I think that throwing a hissy fit about a video game is a good use of any of our time? No. At this point, the Harry Potter franchise is as much of a cultural zeitgeist in the West as Studio Ghibli is in the East. We would have to erase Western culture altogether to even come close to getting rid of it. It would be a much better use of our time to just pretend Joanne doesn't exist. She literally admitted to only making content because it gives her attention. Just ignore her and she will eventually fade into obscurity or commit a crime for attention. I'm fine with both.
Matthew McConaughey is terrible.
Before we move on, I want to share a story of something that happened to me recently. So I was in a psychology class and my professor was highlighting the importance of taking care of yourself and not overdoing it. A classmate immediately responded with how sometimes you have to take 18 credit hours for scholarships and how you sometimes need to work 2, even 3 jobs in order to support yourself while in college. And rent is super expensive and so on and so forth. I used to think the same way. But then I tried to kill myself because of how hard I was pushing myself. So pop off, I guess. For context, I teach 13-year-olds, and these are the exact same responses they give me. Why have we as a society decided that everything sucks all of the time, all at once? Everything Everywhere All at Once is a 2020 movie that you may or may not have heard of, as it is rather popular. The movie follows a Chinese-American immigrant named Evelyn Wang, who is dealing with IRS audits. She suddenly discovers herself being swept up in a multiverse conspiracy theory to take down the evil Jobu Kupaki. Now, I do need to give a minor spoiler warning for the plot of the movie, as I do need to discuss some of the points of the plot in order to illustrate my point. Jobu Kupaki is a being whose mind has been fractured. She has the ability to see all instances of herself at all times. Because of this, she has become somewhat jaded and pessimistic. Despite knowing all things, she does not feel powerful, but overwhelmed. If you can see everything and you know everything, what's the point? For those of you who are still confused as to what this has to do with being chronically online, Let me explain. Like Jobu, we have access to all of the information we want at any time, and much like her, we have become jaded and pessimistic. Back in ye olden days, there were a lot of aspects about the world that we didn't know about. Have you ever heard the saying, ignorance is bliss? Think about that concept. For those of you who have spent time around ultra-conservative people, you know that sort of vaguely glossy stare they tend to have. That's the reason. Most of them, for lack of a better word, are not that bright when it comes to matters about the world. And yet they are incredibly happy. To be put quite simply, we are not meant to see all of the information that we have. Now, don't get me wrong, knowledge is power. However, all 18,000 Google results for what is gaslighting are probably not all that accurate. There needs to be a balance when it comes to knowledge, one which we have greatly surpassed. Additionally, we can take the approach of Evelyn, who, and I have to give a major spoiler warning here, ends up fracturing herself into many pieces and obtains the same abilities as Jobu. However, unlike Jobu,
you are ugly. What the hell?
many people think the solution to capitalism is don't buy things, and the solution to take down J.K. Rowling is don't buy her stuff. Fun fact, she doesn't care if you buy her stuff. Joanne literally does not need to make another piece of media for the rest of her life. That is how wealthy she is. And the same goes for most wealthy people. Most wealthy people only do things because they are bored. Bezos went into space because he thought it would be fun. Musk bought Twitter because why not? If you have more money than God, why not drop a couple mil on a quick trip to the stratosphere? Or argue with people on Twitter? Or buy Twitter, destroy it beyond repair, and then blame the users. That's always a fun one. Although I have been talking about rich people, this applies to us common folk as well. As I mentioned in the previous section, we have access to all of the information in the world, and yet somehow we are incredibly bored. Think to yourself, have you ever been bored while scrolling through TikTok or Twitter? According to an article from the NIH, boredom is related to activities that feel useless or unchallenged, and do not serve any purpose towards personally meaningful goals. I don't know about you, but I feel like that hits social media right on the nose. This is a scientific paper, so it's quite beefy and hard to read, but the condensed version is that tasks that take away autonomy or that can be done automatically without thinking about them have a higher chance of inducing boredom and depression. With that being said, we can apply this same concept to the bored billionaires, but at a much smaller scale. See, boredom often leads people to do anything they can to alleviate that boredom. And for me, and for many other people I'm sure, that became starting online arguments.
Capitalism really popped off today, ladies.
We have spent a lot of time focusing on how these extreme viewpoints are formed in your brain. However, let's shift focus to the big baddie, capitalism. Media criticizing capitalism is nothing new, but I think the best example of this is cyberpunk. Cyberpunk is a subgenre of science fiction that takes place in a dystopian, futuristic setting that tends to focus on a combination of low life and high tech. Characters will often live in squalor, but also have advanced technology such as bionics and the internet. They tend to focus on topics relating to what is the soul, how technology will impact us in the future, and artificial intelligence. This genre also tends to be hypercritical of capitalism and often examines what would happen if we were to let it go awry, which we sort of have, but that's a discussion for another day. The video game Cyberpunk 2077 takes these ideas in stride, with you working to take down the evil Arasaka Corporation. Depending on the route you take on your playthrough, there will be a few different endings, but none of these are really good endings, as something bad will always happen to your character. But some are more bittersweet than others, with the path of least resistance being one of the worst. However, they all have the same basic premise. It doesn't matter what you do. In the end, the city will always win. Whether you bomb Arasaka as Johnny, V, or even David Martinez, the game wants you to know that you don't matter. Now, as depressing as that sounds, there is a reason this content is written like this. In many other genres, we have stories of plucky misfits taking down those big evil corporations and saving the day. Although this makes for great stories, it rarely goes down like this in real life. The fact of the matter is that Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are too powerful for any one person to take down. Now, why does this matter? Well, these companies will do, to the general public at least, what is right, but behind the scenes, they're funding oil barons. Sure, we care about the environment, said the CEO as they dropped $20 million on an oil baron. Elon Musk literally invented a computer chip that goes in people's brains. You know what other people have computer chips in their brains? The people of Cyberpunk 2077. For my socialism girlies, you already know about the dangers of late-stage capitalism. Basically, we've gotten to a point where CEOs must maximize their profits, even if it comes to the detriment of others. This is why most media produced today is awful. It's better to be safe and make a lot of money than to try something new and lose even a single cent. For those of us who have political views that align with the general populace, we don't know this is a problem. In fact, many of you have been influenced in ways that you don't even know. How many of you have seen movies or games where it's referenced that it isn't capitalism that's bad, it's just the person in charge? Think of the Onceler from the Lorax. If popular opinion were to ever change, these companies would drop what you think is important in a heartbeat if it means that they're going to make more money doing something else. The only reason companies appear to be liberal is because the majority of people consuming their products are liberal. Basically, if that ever changes, they will too. Like that. I want you to do a little experiment for me. Go to your browser setting and clear your history and cookie data. Then go to a random shopping website, view one product, then go back to your browser setting and see how many cookies you've accumulated. Each one of these cookies is a piece of information, and from that one search, there are probably well over 30. Now, before we go on, I feel as if I should explain what a cookie is. A cookie is a small text file with a little piece of information. The most common one would be a username or password. Think when you put information into your search engine and it asks if you want it to save the password. However, they also save information like what you bought, how often did you visit the site, where do you visit the site? What time periods do you visit the site? You know how I mentioned before there are a lot of companies that own other companies? There are also companies which sell your data, which they collect using your cookies, to other companies that you probably did not agree to have your data shared with. You could buy BLM stickers from an independent Etsy store, and it could end up on a neo-Nazi group or a pro-segregation group, because those were the companies that happened to have cookies that they were collecting from Etsy. It is also shockingly easy to find personal information on anyone. Currently, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Utah, and Virginia have enacted comprehensive consumer data privacy laws. These laws have several provisions in common, such as the right to access and delete personal information and to opt out of the sale of personal information, amongst others. As for the other states, who's to say? Some of them do, some of them don't. Basically, it's very easy to find very personal information on a lot of people with a simple Google search. I hope you are starting to understand how easy it is to manipulate people. Additionally, this is the whole reason certain websites are free. As we discussed before, in a capitalistic society, there is no such thing as a free product. If it's free, these cookies are oftentimes how they make money. Your data, which holds valuable information about who you are, is sold to companies who use this information to customize content specifically for you. I'm so very sorry to say, but the ideas that you have formed on your own free will have actually been handpicked by companies that want you to buy and consume certain things.
I didn't want to make this video.
White is a YouTuber with over 1 billion subscribers who is liked by the LGBTQ+ community due to the openness about his bisexuality. However, he has recently come under fire for some allegations that we later found out weren't even remotely true, and there's a lot to go into that, so I'm not going to go into it now. There are a lot of videos explaining the situation, but just know that some of the allegations posed against him were very serious if they were true. The fact that a lot of these issues were even aired publicly in the first place was definitely not good, as anything involving the things that he was accused of should never be brought up in the public eye, in my opinion, but unfortunately they were. And here we are. However, it is important to recognize that this is only the most recent in the string of allegations made against YouTubers, whether they be true or not. It happens all the time. There is definitely a bit of power play going on with parasocial relationships, however, I don't think that's the full story. Putting yourself on camera for millions of people is not something that the average person wants to do. I should know, I'm an egotistical theater kid with a god complex. I have gone semi-viral a few times for posting absolutely ice-cold takes on the internet. And it is one of the reasons I became less active. I became addicted to the power. With that being said, most of these people need to be good in order to make money. Yes, some of the people who you look up to on the internet are actually good people, but there's also many of them who aren't, who are in fact just egotistical maniacs. Now, to the average person, likability doesn't really pose a threat to them in their everyday life. Even if it is, IRL interactions are rather civil, as there's something about seeing somebody's facial expressions and intonation that reminds our primate brains that we are social creatures and therefore need companionship to survive. Being an influencer or a celebrity adds a strange nuance to this phenomenon. As most of the people that they interact with, they don't know in real life and are purely online interactions. When we are conversing with people in real life, there are many nuances we have that you wouldn't realize or have otherwise. For example, we often ask clarifying questions. Many people have pre-made mental maps and generalizations based on their life experiences. Due to this, how you see things can vary greatly depending on where you are from and how you were raised. In conversation, you can ask questions to clarify the meaning and avoid confusion of what was said. When a random influencer is posting a tweet or a TikTok video, a lot of that nuance is removed. Additionally, those chronically online people I was talking about earlier take offense to everything, and just flat out make things up for clout. Also, being self-serving is not a bad trait, it's kind of necessary for the survival of our species. We're kind of programmed to want to take care of ourselves and keep ourselves safe. Because, you know, death isn't really a good option. And again, this isn't really a thing that we have to deal with in the modern day and age. However, trying to defend yourself intellectually, your body still perceives as a threat, so like, yeah, obviously primate brain kicks in there. It's not necessarily bad to, you know, care for yourself.
Same old shit. Same old fucking shit.
Did you know that every 100 years or so we get a major disease that wipes out a vast amount of people? In 2020, it was COVID-19. In 1918, it was the Spanish flu. In pretty much the entirety of the late 17 to mid 1800s, it was the bubonic plague. And also the bubonic plague in the late 1620s and smallpox in the 1520s. The moral of the story is that the bubonic plague was a problem for a long time. One of the only differences between these diseases was how fast we were able to handle them. Once we discovered vaccines, a major plague could be alleviated in a few years, but it would still happen every generation. Humans are incredibly bad at changing our habits, and we tend to repeat mistakes about every generation. We see this in the 50s, the 70s, and the 90s, with the rock, hippie, and grunge movements, respectively. If you were to track birth rates, you would see that we tend to have wild and liberal teens grow up to have conservative and well-mannered children, and vice versa. I don't know if there is an actual name for this phenomenon, but I'm calling it the slingshot effect. Like most things, humans try to find an equilibrium. Unlike most things, we slingshot violently in the wrong directions, missing it entirely. Every time I hear an old person complain about how the youth are turning to the devil, I just laugh, because they did the exact same thing in, drumroll please, the 1980s and 1990s. Remember what I was saying about the grunge period of the 90s? Now, for those of you paying attention, you may have noticed that the 90s was long enough ago for another generation to pop up and have children, just in time for Satanic Panic Part 2, Electric Boogaloo. I know this section has been pretty lighthearted, but it's mostly to highlight that literally everything people complain about has happened at least 3 times, probably more than that. Another example I wanted to add was the major stock crashes in history. The first one happened in the 30s and followed the boom in the stock market. The second happened in the 2010s and followed the boom in tech. And we are currently having a third one that is following the disaster that was crypto. The crazy thing about this is that almost 100 years ago to the day, there was a huge boom in liberation, followed by a major plague, and then a stock market crash. What a strange coincidence.
La resistance! Okay, you don't want any of that, okay? You don't want that to happen.
Right before I made my formal departure from the internet, I started to notice something rather interesting. Many of the people who used to be incredibly liberal were starting to shift the other direction, and the realization of chronically online people started to become more fully realized. Those of you who are on TikTok may have seen the girl with the chronically online list. To add to this trend, many of the conservative archetypes have started to get noticeably tired of doing the same thing every day. Shout out to my man, Tucker Carlson, having to cover whatever the hell is going on with M&Ms every 3 to 5 business days. Ollie London and Jeffree Star have even tried to cozy up with the conservatives, one having more success than others, although I think this may have more to do with their desperate attempts at staying relevant. If you have watched a debate against someone who is chronically online versus literally anyone else, you start to realize just how removed from society they really are. If you are arguing against someone like Ben Shapiro, who is able to pull facts out of seemingly nowhere and leave his opponents in the dust, it is no wonder people are more inclined to like him. I will link a YouTube video that explained the SJW to conservative pipeline, as the video explains it much better than I ever could. Additionally, many people are finally starting to have their mental sets broken. Breaking a mental set is not easy to do. In fact, it's quite hard. I've mentioned this quite a lot before, but I will say it again because it is so important to understand. Humans are incredibly stubborn. There are a few reasons for this, but most of them have to do with how we process and store information. Every time we get a new piece of information, it is added into our pre-existing concepts and schema that we have created, mental files and concepts respectively. In today's world, this is useful for identifying something or someone you have never seen before. For example, you can identify the Christmas season and a police officer from 2 simple pictures. The original purpose of this was to identify objects that may be dangerous or useful. Think seeing a brightly colored reptile that you have never seen before and automatically being wary of it because you ate a different brightly colored reptile last season and it almost killed you. Change brightly colored reptile to person of color, and you can start to see the issues that come up from the modern day. This is not to say that we should abandon modern media altogether. In fact, a TED Talk from Max Reisner, I think that was pronounced correctly, suggests that we should instead strive to make meaningful content rather than clickbaity videos and headlines designed only for the purpose of collecting clicks. Max actually has a YouTube channel that I find quite a bit of joy in watching. Also, I forgot to include this in the original video, but most people are pretty central in their political beliefs and get along in real life. I myself have many conservative and liberal friends, and I get along with most of them. This video goes into more depth if you are interested. The skinny of this whole thing? People are beyond tired. Most people don't like fighting, and with the world becoming more and more divided, we do not want to spend the rest of our lives pretending we hate each other. Most of us just want to spend our time with each other and actually get along. I was so desperate to make this video so artsy, and I'm like, oh, I'm outside, and I have the mountains in the background, and it's also still basically winter, and it's like 40 degrees, and I'm not wearing a coat. Who thought that was a good idea?